All right. Welcome back, everybody, to the Deep Dive. We're going to be talking all about flood insurance today,
Oh, yeah.
which is something that a lot of people, I think, kind of, they know they need it, but they don't really want to think about it.
Right.
And so we're going to get into it and hopefully make it a little bit more clear for folks.
I think that's a good idea because flood insurance is one of those things you just don't want to think about until you need it. And then it's like, oh, no, I should have thought about this before.
Yeah, it's like that insurance in general, right? It's just kind of like, I'll deal with that when it happens. But you really don't want to be caught in that situation, especially with flooding.
Especially with flooding because, that can happen very suddenly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the thing with flooding that's so scary is that unlike a fire or something like that, you can't really predict it.
No.
It could be a storm surge, miles away from the ocean, and then all of a sudden you're flooded, and you're like, what do I do?
Right. And I think what's interesting is that a lot of people don't realize that flooding is actually not covered under normal homeowners insurance.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. So, if you have damage from a burst pipe or, a leaky roof, that's one thing. But when it comes to like natural flooding from a hurricane or a storm surge, you need a separate policy.
Yeah. That's really important for people to know.
Yeah.
So let's get into that a little bit more. Like, what are our options when it comes to flood insurance?
So basically, you have two main options. You've got the National Flood Insurance Program, which is known as NFIP.
Catchy.
Yeah. And then you've got private flood insurance.
So NFIP and private, like those are our two big choices.
Exactly.
So tell me a little bit more about what each one kind of does. Like, what are they covering?
Okay, so at their core, both types of policies will cover damage to your building, your personal belongings, and, other structures on your property.
So like a detached garage or something like that.
Exactly, like a detached garage, a shed, anything like that. And this is damage that's specifically caused by flooding.
Right. Now, one thing that both types of policies also have is a deductible.
Ah, so that's the amount of money that you have to pay out of pocket before the insurance kicks in.
Exactly.
Okay, so they both kind of cover the basics, but I imagine there are some pretty big differences between the two, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. One of the biggest differences is the coverage limits.
Yeah.
So with NFIP, the maximum amount you can get for your building is $250,000.
Okay.
And for your belongings, it's $100,000.
So if your house, is worth more than $250,000 or you have a lot of valuable stuff inside, you could end up having to pay a lot out of pocket if there's a major flood.
Exactly. And that's where private flood insurance can be a good option because they often have much higher coverage limits.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can get up to $500,000 or even more for your building and your belongings.
Wow. Okay, so higher limits with private insurance. That's something to consider for sure. What else is different?
Another key difference is the waiting period.
Waiting period. What's that?
So with NFIP, there's a 30-day waiting period after you buy the policy before it actually takes effect. What? So you're telling me if I buy a policy and then 2 weeks later my house floods, I'm not covered?
That's right. You have to wait that full 30 days before you can actually file a claim.
Oh, man, that's risky.
It is. But the good news is that private flood insurance often has shorter waiting periods, and some even have no waiting period at all.
Oh, okay. So you could potentially be covered right away with a private policy.
Exactly.
So private is sounding pretty good so far. Higher limits, shorter waiting periods, anything else?
There's actually a lot more that private flood insurance can offer. For example, they might have coverage for additional living expenses if your home is uninhabitable after a flood.
So like if you have to stay in a hotel or eat out because your kitchen's destroyed.
Exactly. They'll help cover those costs, which can really add up.
That's huge, especially if you have to be out of your home for a while.
Right. And private insurers also tend to be more flexible with their coverage options, so you can really tailor the policy to your specific needs.
That's interesting. So what kind of options are we talking about?
Well, one thing they might offer is replacement cost value for your belongings.
Replacement cost value? I'm not sure I'm familiar with that one.
So let's say your 5-year-old couch gets ruined in a flood. With replacement cost value, the insurance company will pay for a brand new couch, not just the depreciated value of your old one.
Oh, wow. So you're not stuck with, whatever you can get at a thrift store. You actually get a brand new couch.
That's right. And they might also have higher limits for specific valuable items like jewelry or artwork.
Ah, so if you have, a really expensive painting or a family heirloom, you can make sure it's fully covered.
Exactly.
Okay. This is all sounding pretty amazing, but there's got to be a downside, right? What about the cost?
Well, the cost of private flood insurance can vary depending on a lot of factors, but one thing that sets them apart is how they assess risk.
Risk. What do you mean?
So NIP uses a pretty general approach to assessing flood risk. They basically look at your zip code and determine your risk based on that.
So everyone in the same zip code pays the same, even if their houses are in totally different locations.
Pretty much. But private insurers use much more sophisticated risk models.
Mhm.
They take into account things like the elevation of your property, its proximity to water sources, and even the history of flooding in your specific area.
So if my house is on a hilltop, miles from any water, I might actually get a lower premium with private insurance.
Exactly, because they're recognizing that your actual risk is lower than what NFIP might assume based on your zip code.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But I guess the opposite could be true too, right? If you're in a really high-risk area, your premiums could be higher with private insurance.
That's right, because they're taking a more personalized approach to assessing your risk.
Okay, so cost is kind of a mixed bag. It could be lower or higher depending on your individual situation.
Exactly.
So I think we've covered a lot of the key differences between NFIP and private flood insurance. But before we wrap up, there's one more thing I want to touch on: lender requirements.
Oh, yes, that's an important one.
So if you have a mortgage on your home, does it matter which type of flood insurance you get?
It can. If you have a federally backed mortgage and you're in a high-risk flood zone, NFIP insurance is usually mandatory.
So you don't really have a choice. In that case, you have to go with NFIP.
Right. But some lenders might accept private flood insurance as an alternative, so it's always best to check with your lender to be sure.
Really good advice. So to sum it all up, how do we choose between these two options?
Well, if you're looking for higher coverage limits, more flexibility, and potentially lower premiums based on a more accurate risk assessment, private flood insurance is definitely worth considering.
And what about NFIP? When would that be the better choice?
NFIP is a good option if you're in a lower risk area and need basic coverage, or if your lender requires it. It's a solid baseline level of protection that can be more affordable in some cases.
This has been really helpful. I think we've covered a lot of ground today, but I know this can be a complicated topic. So if any of our listeners out there are feeling overwhelmed and want some expert guidance, I highly recommend checking out the Flood Nerds.
Yes, they're a fantastic resource.
You can find them online at www.floodnerds.com or give them a call at 866-990-7482. They can help you compare different flood insurance options and find the best policy for your specific needs.
And they really know their stuff.
All right, so final thoughts for our listeners out there. Thinking about your own home, your own valuables. What level of protection feels right for you?
That's the key question.
Don't just settle for the first option you see or assume that you're automatically covered. Do your research, compare quotes, and make an informed decision that gives you peace of mind.
And remember, even if you're not required to have flood insurance, it's always worth considering. Flood damage can be devastating, and it's better to be protected than to be caught off guard.
Absolutely. Great advice. That's all the time we have for today, but we hope this deep dive into flood insurance has been helpful for you.
Yes, we hope so.
And remember, everyone stay safe out there, and don't forget to protect yourself from those floods.
Until next time.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.